The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
with you.
Also with you.
God of us all, what a job you have. I'm so glad I am not you. Help us remember, Lord, that you do love us all and that you have made us all to be family in humanity, brothers and sisters to one another, made to love one another as we love ourselves. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
We are at 1:35, are we not?
135.
All right. Bob, could you bring it up on the screen for us?
Is that large enough for people?
I'm
Sounds
sorry.
I just want to be sure it was large enough on screen for people.
It's okay for me.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. Who would like to read?
Read. Here, I would mention some examples that I've used in the past. Latino culture is a ferment of values and possibilities that can greatly enrich the United States. For intense immigration always ends up influencing and transforming the culture of a place. In Argentina, intense immigration from Italy has left a mark on the culture of the society, and the presence of some 200,000 Jews has a great effect on the culture or a style of Buenos Aires. Immigrants, if they are helped to integrate, are a blessing, a source of enrichment, and new gift that encourages a society to grow.
Yep.
On an even broader scale, Grand Ayman Ahmad al-Tayeb, I think, and I have observed that good relations between East and West are indisputably necessary for both. They must not be neglected so that each can be enriched by the other's culture through fruitful exchange and dialogue. The West can discover in the East remedies for those spiritual and religious maladies that are caused by a prevailing materialism. And the East can find in the West many elements that can help free it from weakness, division, conflict, and scientific, difficult, and cultural decline. It is important to pay attention to religious, cultural, and historical differences that are a vital component in shaping the character, culture, and civilization of the East. It is likewise important to reinforce the bond of fundamental human rights in order to help ensure a dignified life for all the men and women of East and West, avoiding the politics of double standards. Should we just keep going?
Unless there's something you want to address in what's been read so far.
Okay, mutual assistance between countries proves enriching for each. A country that moves forward while remaining solidly grounded in its original culture, substratum, okay, is a treasure for the whole of humanity. We need to develop the awareness that nowadays we are either all saved together or no one is saved. Poverty, decadence, and suffering in one part of the earth are a silent breeding ground for problems that will end up affecting the entire planet. If we are troubled by the extinction of certain species, we should be all the more troubled that in some parts of our world, individuals or people are prevented from developing their potential and beauty by poverty or other structural limitations. In the end, this will impoverish us all. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it is.
Although this has always been true, Never has it been more evident than in our own day, when the world is interconnected by globalization. We need to attain a global
Juridical.
juridical, political, and economic order, which can increase and give direction to international cooperation for the development of all peoples in solidarity. Ultimately, this will benefit the entire world, since development aid for poor countries implies creating wealth for all. From the standpoint of integral development, this presupposes giving poor nations an effective voice in shared decision-making and the capacity to facilitate access to the international market on the part of countries suffering from poverty and underdevelopment.
Hang on a second. This presupposes giving poorness. Okay.
You know, that really all of a sudden jumps up and bites me. That is saying in World Nation Organization, do these poor countries really do they really have the same voice, the same ability, or are they dismissed? And I don't know the answer, but are they dismissed because of the lack of intellectual ability, or their ability to provide, outsource? I wonder if that happened.
I love reading over the church's emails.
Oh, what?
There's information from Lutheran World Relief and how much they do for other countries. Lutheran LWR and World Hunger. They go into these countries that are so poor and offer help.
Yeah, those poorer countries do not come to the table as equals. And they don't usually have the same kind of clout and voice just because they do not have the economic clout. They are the ones that usually come asking for help. And because of that, they aren't listened to with the same attentiveness. The irony, of course, is that as soon as serious assets are discovered in those countries, they're the first to be manipulated. It's just been the way of the world. There's a huge and couple of really glaring examples right now in the world. Congo is one, really rich in mineral resources, especially some rare metals that are necessary for technology, for computer development, rare earth magnets and things like that. Afghanistan is also incredibly wealthy in minerals. It could be one of the richest countries in the world, but they can't stop fighting long enough. And it's and every time they've tried to come to the table, other major powers, other major economic powers get so involved in playing ping pong with them and trying to control the narrative that everything falls apart quickly and they degenerate back into their own internal troubles. And this is what happens over and over again. And then the people with the money play all those forces against each other. It's really unfortunate because the whole world ends up losing. And the country ends up losing. And the people in the country lose most of all. Anyway, that's an oversimplification, but it's basically the way it all plays out.
I'm going back to 135, when the Pope is talking about how rich a culture becomes by incorporating other cultures. And I can't help but think that he's talking about the United States, because that's really what we are. I mean, when you look at our country and all the different cultures that have been blended and enhanced and enriched, just the mere fact that we have the ability to celebrate so many different festivals based upon people's religious beliefs or cultural beliefs, we are all richer as a result. I'll put you on mute. Sorry about that. Oh, it's fine.
Call from.
Somebody really needs to talk to us about our auto warranty. I'm seriously. And it's the last call. No, okay, sorry. Somebody else want to read? Okay, then I'll keep going. You're just all scared of the word gratuitousness, open to others. Even so, I do not wish to limit this presentation to a kind of utilitarian approach. There is always the factor of gratuitousness, the ability to do some things simply because they are good in themselves, without concern for personal gain or recompense. Gratuitousness makes it possible for us to welcome the stranger, even though this brings us no immediate tangible benefit. Some countries, though, presume to accept only scientists or investors. Life without fraternal gratuitousness becomes a form of frenetic commerce in which we are constantly weighing up what we give and what we get back in return. God, on the other hand, gives freely to the point of helping even those who are unfaithful. He makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good. There is a reason why Jesus told us, when you give alms, do not let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret. We received life freely. We paid nothing for it. Consequently, all of us are able to give without expecting anything in return, to do good to others without demanding that they treat us well in return. As Jesus told his disciples, without cost you have received, without cost you are to give. The true worth of the different countries of our world is measured by their ability to think not simply as a country, but also as a part of the larger human family. This is seen especially in times of crisis. Narrow forms of nationalism are an extreme expression of an inability to grasp the meaning of this gratuitousness. They err in thinking that they can develop on their own, heedless of the ruins of others, that by closing their doors to others, they will be better protected. Immigrants are seen as usurpers who have nothing to offer. This leads to the simplistic belief that the poor are dangerous and useless, while the powerful are generous and benefactors. Only as a social and political culture that readily and gratuitously welcomes others will have a future. Okay. Local and universal. It should be kept in mind that an innate tension exists between globalization and localization. We need to pay attention to the global so as to avoid narrowness and banality. Yet we also need to look to the local, which keeps our feet on the ground. Together, the two prevent us from falling into one of two extremes. In the first, people get caught up in an abstract, globalized universe. In the other, they turn into a museum of local folklore a world apart, doomed to doing the same things over and over, incapable of being challenged by novelty or appreciating the beauty which God bestows beyond their borders. We need to have a global outlook to save ourselves from petty provincialism. When our house stops being a home and starts to become an enclosure, a cell, then the global comes to our rescue. Like a final cause that draws us towards our fulfillment. At the same time, though, the local has to be eagerly embraced, for it possesses something that the global does not. It is capable of being a leaven, of bringing enrichment, of sparkling mechanism of subsidiary. Universal fraternity and social friendship are thus two inseparable and equally vital poles in every society. To separate them would be to disfigure each and to create a dangerous polarization. It's interesting how you think about our individual communities, and we kind of do that now. You've got the Naples Islands people, the Seal Beach people, the Hill people, and each of them have a different set of values that they predisposes or considers for where they live. And that's just so, in such a small little example. It's just like, if you live in Long Beach, you can get a vaccination. If you live in Seal Beach, forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
The local flavor. The solution is not an openness that spurns its own richness, just as there can be no dialogue with others without a sense of our own identity. So there can be no openness between peoples except on the basis of love for one's own land, one's own people, one's own cultural roots. I cannot truly encounter another unless I stand on firm foundations, for it is on the basis of these that I can accept the gift that the other brings, and in turn offer an authentic gift of my own. I can welcome others who are different and value the unique contribution they have to make. Only if I am firmly rooted in my own people and culture, everyone loves and cares for his or her native land and village, just as they love and care for their home and are personally responsible for its upkeep. The common good likewise requires that we protect and love our native land. Otherwise, the consequences of a disaster in one country will end up affecting the entire planet. All this brings out the positive meaning of the right to property. I care for and cultivate something that I possess in such a way that it can contribute to the good of all.
Karen, I can take over if you want.
Okay, go for it.
Any other thoughts or questions before I go on? Okay. It also gives rise to healthy and enriching exchanges. The experience of being raised in a particular place and sharing in a particular culture gives us insight into aspects of reality that others cannot so easily perceive. Universal does not necessarily mean bland, uniform, and standardized, based on a single prevailing cultural model, for this will ultimately lead to the loss of a rich palette of shades and colors and result in utter monotony. Such was the temptation referred to in the ancient account of the Tower of Babel. The attempt to build a tower that would reach to heaven was not an expression of unity between various peoples speaking to one another from their diversity. Instead, it was a misguided attempt born of pride and ambition to create a unity other than that willed by God in his providential plan for the nations. There can be a false openness to the universal, born of the shallowness of those lacking insight into the genius of their native land or harboring unresolved resentment towards their own people. Whatever the case, we constantly have to broaden our horizons and see the greater good, which will benefit us all. But this has to be done without evasion or uprooting. We need to sink our roots deeper into the fertile soil and history of our native place, which is a gift of God. We can work on a small scale in our own neighborhood, but with a larger perspective. The global need not stifle, nor the particular prove barren. Our model must be that of a polyhedron in which the value of each individual is respected, where the whole is greater than the part, but it is also greater than the sum of its parts. There is a kind of local narcissism unrelated to a healthy love of one's own people and culture. It is born of a certain insecurity and fear of the other that leads to rejection and the desire to erect walls for self-defense. Yet it is possible to be local in a healthy way without being sincerely open to the universal, without feeling challenged by what is happening in other places, without openness to enrichment by other cultures, and without solidarity and concern for the tragedies affecting other peoples. A local narcissism instead frets over a limited number of ideas, customs, and forms of security, incapable of admiring the vast potential and beauty offered by the larger world. It lacks an authentic and generous spirit of solidarity. Life on the local level thus becomes less and less welcoming. People less open to complementarity, its possibilities for development narrow. It grows weary and infirm. A healthy culture, on the other hand, is open and welcoming by its very nature. Indeed, a culture without universal values is not truly a culture.
Let me pause there for a minute. This is reminding me a lot of the idea that a lot of people in the ancient world had of limited good, which we've talked about in our Sunday morning class, which is why, which is one of the ideas that Jesus was trying to address so often in his parables. You know, they believed that if somebody had a lot, it was because they'd taken things from somebody else. It was at someone else's expense. And it seems sometimes to me like this idea is almost built into us, which is why we end up with some of these kinds of feelings. Like if we let these people in, they're going to take some of my resources because resources are limited. Well, that is not necessarily true. I mean, they're going to maybe bring resources in with them. They're going to bring capabilities in with them. They're going to expand the economy, not shrink it. But we always tend to rush right immediately to limited good. This local narcissism idea, too, it's like we have a limited number of ideas, and they're going to bring in these other ideas, and those ideas are going to compete with our ideas. Instead of, we're going to have a larger pool of ideas to draw from. We're going to have newer ways of looking at things. We might have new ways to solve problems. It's just because we tend to get limited in our thinking. We have the idea of limited good. We forget that the starting idea in Genesis, when God created everything, is he looked at all. God looked at all that had been made and said, it's good. It's all good. Sorry.
I have a couple of thoughts. First, building on what on what you've just said, Pastor. I remember several years ago, I think probably on the TV on a program about Chobani yogurt, which is from Iowa, Idaho, someplace in the Midwest. So that company was started by an immigrant. And,
Chobani, yeah.
Yeah. So it started by an immigrant and producing a good product. I eat it a lot, and has employed, brought hundreds of jobs to that locale. So he's really been able to bring something in, a new idea, and build it up. The dark side of that is that he's received death threats because he's an immigrant. Isn't that bizarre and sad? The other thing I wanted to point out, I was really taken by the end of paragraph 144. It really, for some reason, it was very attractive to me and kind of brought things together, where he says, just a second, let me get my other page. So this leads to a simplistic belief that the poor are dangerous and useless, while the powerful are generous benefactors. And then it says, create a unity other than that willed by God. And a unity other than that willed by God, that really struck me as being another way of looking at universalism as an ability to unify nations, as opposed to, what's the word I'm looking for? As opposed to, I guess, breaking nations apart, or separating nations, or driving a wedge between nations, maybe because of commerce. A unity other than that willed by God, and the unity that is willed by God is something that we need to keep kind of top in mind. That's all I got.
Yeah, there was that phrase too in 145 about harboring resentment to their own people.
Yeah, let me just say, I picked up the wrong, as I would, I picked up the wrong sheet on 144 ends this way. Instead of a misguided attempt born of pride and ambition to create a unity other than that willed by God and his providential plan. I apologize. I picked up the following page rather than the preceding page. And that really struck me. It was kind of, it really brought all of these other paragraphs that he has, the preceding paragraphs that we've been reading. To me, it really brought it together, coalesced everything into a very simple concept. Not that it could be easily executed, but it really was very cohesive to me.
Yeah. I think, I wonder if he's building up, there is in theology, well, and in psychology too, the concept of scapegoating. Whenever things aren't going the way I want them to go, I look for someone to blame. I look for a scapegoat. There's a theory of atonement called the final scapegoat. We can talk about that another time when we look at atonement theories. But the idea is basically that Jesus is the final scapegoat when he's crucified. That Jesus is God's way of saying, stop scapegoating. Stop looking for someone else to blame. I will take all the blame for everything. Now be done with it. Take responsibility for your own mistakes, your own problems, your own anger, your own fear, and stop trying to pin it on somebody else. Here's what happens when you scapegoat. You end up crucifying someone innocent. And in all of these paragraphs, I'm seeing scapegoating over and over and over again. We see these people who are the other, and we want to make them the problem, make them the source of our anxiety, make them the source of our fear, make them the source of our problem, instead of saying, no, this is our problem. They could be our opportunity. They could be our solution, or they could just be themselves coming in looking for their own opportunity. They could be our brothers and sisters. They could be our neighbors. We don't need to turn them into something they are not. We don't need to make them an enemy. We don't need to make them a problem. We don't need to make them anything they are not. We don't need to make them a them. Anyway, I think that might be a kind of where the Pope is going here with all of this, except he's dissecting the problem quite finely. Pray continue.
Okay, let us realize that as our minds and hearts narrow, the less capable we become of understanding the world around us. Without encountering and relating to differences, it is hard to achieve a clear and complete understanding even of ourselves and of our native land. Other cultures are not enemies from which we need to protect ourselves, but differing reflections of the inexhaustible richness of human life. Seeing ourselves from the perspective of another, of one who is different, we can better recognize our own unique features and those of our culture, its richness, its possibilities, and its limitations. Our local experience needs to develop in contrast to and in harmony with the experiences of others living in diverse cultural contexts. In fact, a healthy openness never threatens one's own identity. A living culture enriched by elements from other places does not import a mere carbon copy of those new elements, but integrates them in its own unique way. The result is a new synthesis that is ultimately beneficial to all, since the original culture itself ends up being nourished. That is why I have urged Indigenous peoples to cherish their roots and their ancestral cultures. At the same time, though, I have wanted to stress that I have no intention of proposing a completely enclosed, ahistoric, static indigenism that would reject any kind of blending. For our own cultural identity is strengthened and enriched as a result of dialogue with those unlike ourselves, nor is our authentic identity preserved by an impoverished isolation. The world grows and is filled with new beauty thanks to the successive syntheses produced between cultures that are open and free of any form of cultural imposition.
I think Pope Francis is an extrovert. Sometimes being an introvert, sometimes I'm not sure I totally am on board with them. I really liked in 147 what Liz was reading right in the middle. It says, other cultures are not enemies from which we need to protect ourselves, but differing reflections of the inexhaustible richness of life. Well, I really like the way he says differing reflections of life. You know, we all come to life with different viewpoints, and it's so important to be aware of that and to realize that and not be judgmental about other people's viewpoints, but to recognize that they're going to look at situations and just their culture is going to be different, and they're going to handle themselves differently, and that it's important to appreciate that rather than prejudge it.
This is why travel is so important, if one is able to do it, and travel to cultures that are really different from our own. I know that my life and my understanding of the world is so much richer because of the time I've spent in Africa and in South America. And seeing the way people live there and the way they experience life and the way they understand life, and listening to them talk about how they see things, how they understand life. One of the most wonderful experiences I ever had was on Mount Meru. The Nanyaro family had a television. They were the only people for miles and miles around who had a television. And every afternoon, other people all over the mountain would come to their house to watch the news. And I was there at their house, and this little kid, like 12 years old, was watching the news, and the East African Economic Assembly was meeting, the East African Assembly of Nations Economic Forum was meeting in Arusha. And he was following this very, very closely, a 12-year-old kid. And he was giving a political analysis of what was being discussed and what was going on, and how important it was, not just for African economics, but for world economics. The kinds of things that were being discussed at this meeting and what it was going to mean for the world. This kid, 12 years old, was totally on top of this stuff. And I was just amazed listening to him, but also listening to him talk about what it was going to mean for their people there, growing coffee on the sides of Mount Meru, and what it was going to mean for the rest of Tanzania, and what it was going to mean for the rest of East Africa, and what it was going to mean for trade throughout Africa, and how it was going to affect the continent's relationship with the rest of the world. A 12-year-old kid giving some of the best economic and political analysis I've ever heard.
Wow.
But to hear it from his perspective as a 12-year-old, an extremely bright 12-year-old, but to hear it also from an African perspective, and understand they don't see it the way we see it. They're looking at it from a very different place. To hear it spoken by the son of a coffee grower on the slopes of a mountain where they are growing the coffee, and to hear it explained about how that's going to trickle outward, and what it's going to mean when they try to bring their coffee to market, all of those things. It was just powerful. It changes the way you see the world when you have those kinds of experiences. It changes.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Well, it changes also the way you see people who come to this country. When you understand that they bring another experience with them and another way of seeing with them, and that point of view is worth hearing, because your point of view is only partial. And that they have wisdom that you don't. They have knowledge that you don't. They have experience that you don't. And if you want the more complete picture, you need to know what they know. Anyway, what were you going to say, Phil?
A couple of things. One, I wanted to amplify on what you had said, because I've had this similar opportunities to actually be in other cultures. But I think the key, and not available to everybody, but the key is that you've actually lived in the culture. You haven't been a tourist in the culture, but have actually lived in the culture and had to exist in the culture, and not superficially as a tourist, but actually to engage with the people in a meaningful way. Liz is having that same experience, and it really goes to the heart of being able to see that other cultures are able to do things differently from the way we would do something, but they still get it. They still make it happen. And I think that's the awareness that living and working in another culture brings to you, that you may look at it and go, oh my God, these people are so weird.
Mm-hmm.
But they make it happen. And they make it happen in their own way. And it gives you a better perspective on being open to other cultures and what other cultures can bring to our own.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate so much, Pastor, in your Bible study is how I think of the example of the Good Samaritan, on how other cultures react and how they review the story and the different characters. And I think it's so important in those kinds of Bible study examples, how different cultures interpret how we interpret, and then how other cultures interpret, and how they can be so very different from the very same story, from the very same reading within the Bible. And I think for those of us that haven't really experienced living in a different culture, it's really important for me to have an understanding of how different cultures would interpret different things within the Bible as the teachings of Jesus.
Example.
I really appreciate that, the way you bring that into this always, even through bringing into Greek or a different meaning, or, it's like, oh, okay. I mean, it really shines a light on what's been written, and it gives a whole different sense of it.
Okay.
It deepens my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeffrey and I had a very fortunate opportunity when we went to the Holy Land tour to have dinner one night with the Palestinian family, and then the next night with an Israeli family. Two different points of view, and but a remarkable opportunity. I bet, Bob, you have had a lot of circumstances, or with all the travels that you and Stephanie have been on. Did you ever have any opportunities to be with families, different families? You're muted. Okay.
Not so much, but it occurs to me that when we did our Russian tour, the end of the tour, or closing part of the tour, they had two crew members just sit with anybody who had a question that hadn't been answered yet. And so we could ask them just about anything. And it was fascinating to see their perspectives on the world. and the fact that they had, between themselves, they had differing perspectives.
Between themselves? Wow.
Well, yeah, but yes, one of them was very pro-Russia, and the other one was less so.
I think those are really important experiences, interacting with another culture like that, and in Sandy's experience, having dinner with a Palestinian and a Jewish family, because it's the human interaction that really helps to break down that myopic view of our own culture.
Yeah.
That's why I liked your comment, Phil, about that they get life done. And then there's not only one way to do that.
Yeah. This is really kind of far afield, but I can't help but think about, our marriage, Karen, with, Karen and myself. And it's the same way, when you think about it and reflect on it. So we have come from really different backgrounds, and we look at things differently. And sometimes I tend to think that I've got the right idea, only to find out that maybe I'm not so right. Not having any brothers or sisters, I'm a bit myopic. And so it helps to have another point of view. And I don't know if it's even makes sense for me to expand that onto our cultural, going from the minute to the abstract. But in a way, if we're myopic in our own culture, having the experiences that we've had and that we're sharing right now helps us to be less so. It broadens our appreciation that other people have different points of view. And like Karen was saying with regards to the parables, even though they look at it differently from the way that we would interpret it, it still has an impact on them. And that impact is valid.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this from the hippie era, but a man named William Least Heat Moon, a Native American.
Blue highways.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was leading up to. He writes about traveling on the blue highways of the map instead of the red ones, because he got deeper into the heart of the various aspects of our country. And it was very enlightening, especially from his perspective, about how people in the Northwest are different from people in the Southeast, but that the blue highways made all the difference in the world for him. He said he felt that if he had gone on the red highways, he would have missed a wonderful opportunity.
It's an amazing book. It's a wonderful book.
It's a great book.
Blue Highways.
That's the name of it. And his
Blue.
name is William Least Heat Moon.
Okay, I'll write that down.
Yeah.
I'm sure Amazon has it.
I think Venner is the one who enlightened me about that book.
Oh, really?
Really?
Oh, good for Venner.
Yeah. Well, it is 11:01, so
Okay.
we'll pick up at 1:49.
Sounds good.
Thank you all, and I'll see you on Sunday.
Yes.
Got it.
Thank you.
Au
See you
revoir.
Sunday. Ciao, ciao.
Bye, Liz. Stay healthy and well. You having fun?
Always.